Hello folks, Russ Scala here. Today we're going to talk about the people that are first through the door. When you call 911 and those policemen, firemen, and paramedics arrive, and I don't want to leave out the war veterans because they're also first through the door. We're going to talk about new treatment protocols, what they can do to protect themselves, what really happens and what goes on inside their head. Okay, with my history of being a paramedic attached to the SWAT team, I made a lot of mistakes early on with drinking too much and eating bad food, and I wanted to save lives, but I really didn't know what all that emergency training and all that emergency response was doing to my system. It's not too late. I'm going to be okay. Today I have Bruce Robinson with me. He's been a police officer for 25 years. We actually work the streets together, helping people. And we're going to talk about this evolution on what police officers can do to protect themselves, what physicians aren't doing. I mean, when a police officer gets in a problem, he sees a physician, the physician doesn't really have the training to understand physiologically what's going on in the body of emergency workers. There's still a lot of collateral damage with the pulse shootings. There's police officers that have not returned to work yet. So we're going to look at this at 60,000 feet and then drill down actually on a cellular level on what's going on physiologically and what could be done if you know somebody that's a police officer, fireman, a paramedic, or a war veteran. Everything we're talking about here, folks, is new. We've got neurologists, we've got research labs and pharmacies helping us develop these new treatment protocols. So, Bruce, thanks for coming, man.
Thanks for having me.
Good, good. Walk us through your history.
Well, I've been with a local law enforcement agency for 25 years. I spent 10 years of that in the K-9 division and almost 17 years of it on the SWAT team.
Wow.
Now I'm in the office for the most part, very busy still, but wouldn't change it for the world.
That's good, man. That's good. You're one of the guys that are healthy, and this is, back. I was put on the critical incident stress debriefing team in the 80s. We had a police officer and a good friend of mine commit suicide at the city, and I knew back then talk therapy and antidepressants weren't going to work. So what did you do to? I mean, you're in the streets. What did you do differently to keep yourself healthy? Because obesity is a big problem, and obviously you've done really well.
Yeah, and one of my ambitions when I first got on the department was to join the SWAT team. So health was always important to me because I needed to, first of all, get in shape and then maintain my shape or maintain my physical fitness level so I could do well on a team. Every cop that's out there is involved in some sort of stress every day in some way, shape, or form. So they need to fall back onto something to help them relieve that stress. And for me, it was running and working out.
Yeah, that's real important because for me, before I got into running and triathlons, I was drinking all the time because obviously I was young. I was I think 19 years old, 20 when I started, and I was responding to these emergency calls. And of course, I'm not going to tell anybody how I feel. And then the community I was with, the guys that I was hanging out with at the time, weren't really healthy. So I was just going along with the community, drinking, and I didn't understand the toll it was going to take on my body. And at 20, I thought I was bulletproof.
Mm-hmm.
And now I learned a lot. So you had a positive behavior going through that.
Yeah, and a lot of other people did as well. It's just, what activity do you choose to do to help you relieve the stress of everyday life on the street? Just for me, it was working out and running. For other people, it may have been, hiking in the hills or driving to the beach or spending the weekend on the beach. But for me, particularly, I was always into the physical fitness aspect of it.
Yeah, and now we know that when you run and you work out, you increase brain-derived neurotropic factor. Obesity and eating simple carbohydrates, folks, a lot of cops fire, and even myself at the time, when you are hyper alert all that time and you're constantly vigilant, the physiology of a police officer, like when I was a paramedic, I was helping people, but when I was on the SWAT team, I had to change my whole behavior. And that was stressful. I had to, look at people differently. I had to think about, loading my weapons. We had 6 hours we carried and MP5s with a laser scope. And just being on all the time, of course, I thought, I didn't think anything was happening to me, but a lot was happening to me. Even when I was responding to emergency calls, I remember my hands started to shake on emergency scenes. And as soon as I was off work, I would, start drinking, or I would eat the carbohydrates to elevate serotonin levels in my brain. I was medicating myself with alcohol and simple carbs. Didn't know it at the time, but You know the stress. You cycle those thoughts in your head after a shift. You can't shut your brain off.
Yeah, and you go through a whole different range of emotions on any given day, and you need that at the end of the day to do something, because your body does react in ways that, until it happens to you the first time, you're not sure what's going to happen. It's like if you walk up to your first ever car during a traffic stop, or in your SWAT team, you make your first ever entry into the building, based on what position you are in the stack, or if you're on a perimeter. You never know how you're going to react that first time, and after you do that, you kind of make adjustments to yourself and your routine, so that you're used to it.
No,
It
and
becomes
that's
common.
that's a good point. A regular citizen doesn't understand. Like when I went through the police academy, I was obviously a paramedic at the time, and I had to change my skill set. I went through the police academy, and we were practicing traffic stops, where you have all these scenarios in your head about everything bad that happens at a traffic stop. Now, a regular citizen that gets pulled over for a ticket, they have no idea when that cop's walking up, he has these screens dropping in his head. His heart rate's probably 160. He's shit scared. He doesn't know whether you're going to draw down on him, but people think, well, you wonder why these accidents happen where they draw their gun or something happens, because when that officer walks up to the car, I mean, there's a lot going on in his head, and a citizen's thinking like, oh, he just pulled me over for a broken taillight. That doesn't happen. There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, as the saying goes, prepare for the worst and hope for the best. The people that get pulled over, they think, a lot of times, this is an officer come up, he's a robot, he's going to do his thing, and we're going to be done. But what they don't realize is, especially when you first get in the field and you start making your first couple traffic stops, nobody realizes, and you're kind of shocked at how nervous you are when you first make that approach to the vehicle. You don't know who's in there. You don't know if they've just done something bad or are en route to do something bad. So that's always in their mind, and if people just understood, now when you're more experienced into the field, and you've been in those positions more and more often, you're able to condition your body to look for certain things and adjust to different situations. But when you're new and you're thrust into that position, it's something totally unexpected.
Yeah, you're dropping screens in your head. Well, I didn't have
Exactly.
I didn't have the screens in my head from being a police officer. This was all new to me, so it was tough for me to change my mindset, I remember. But I remember just even being a paramedic when I was first out of school, I responded to a vehicle versus the tree. And I responded to the vehicle versus the tree, and there's a guy in there, and he was bleeding, he had a broken arm, and I'm doing everything right.
Hmm.
I'm doing everything by the book. Well, the
Right.
guy was shot twice in the chest. And it didn't find out until we got to the emergency room. So the doctor says, who brought this man in? I'm like real proud, raised my hand. He goes, he's shot. And I'm like, I just wanted to hide.
Yeah.
My point is that when I got caught up in that scene, I'm looking at the car against the tree. I didn't think shooting. But after that happened to me, my God, I took clothes off everybody, because I know that, I had tunnel vision.
Yeah.
So how do you get that experience? They're not going to teach you that in school. It only comes from being on the job. And my point is that experience that we have to go through with all the years, that damages our physiology over time. Now, it happens to a war vet faster,
Hmm.
but over like 10 or 15 years, what you and I've been through, if something happens to us and we go to a regular doctor, forget about it. He's not going to know how to treat us. And that's sort of what we're doing here. We want to educate people, shine light on different areas, because the physiology of a police officer, a SWAT team person, is no different than an athlete. They have to be taken care of differently. You can't just throw. I'm not downing antidepressants. I think antidepressants are a great bridge, but physiologically, the metabolism of an emergency worker, police, fire, paramedic, war veteran, their physiology is breaking down, and that's not being looked at. And that's what we're looking at and talking about today. The reaction and the recovery, what we're trying to do here is shine a light on what happens to the emergency worker's body physiologically. Now, we know the Pulse shooting was not too long ago in Orlando, and we know that there's police officers that have not come back to work yet.
Right.
This really strikes a chord with me, because I know they're not looking at these police officers physiologically. They're using the basic standard of care, talk therapy, maybe antidepressants, and that right there is just treating the symptom, and we're not looking at them physiologically, which we have the testing. We could do that now. You know that.
Right.
So how do you think we get around that?
One of the things that officers and first responders have accessible to them now is something called the EAP, or the Employee Assistance Program. It takes a lot of professionals and puts them together to make them available to first responders for whatever type of help they need, to include financial assistance, medical assistance, psychological assistance. And that's all well and good, but the thing with first responders for the most part is they want to take on this persona of, I'm hardcore, I'm Mr. Tough Guy, I can handle just about anything.
Right, right.
Well, you can for a little while, but you can't do that on a consistent basis, and you can't keep that up. So at some point, it's incumbent upon the officer or the first responder to say, hey, this is affecting me, whether they get those clues from their own mind or their spouse or significant other says, hey, you've changed, and you should do something about it. We need to go talk to somebody. So that's always available there. But one of the things that really got me excited was last night on the news, there was a female, a wife of an officer whose husband was involved in a pulse shooting, and he hasn't returned to work yet because of PTSD. And that's common in those type of situations, whether or not they realize it or not, it is common. But what she's done is she's introduced legislation to make it so that the officers who need that type of assistance get the same type of assistance as if they were injured on duty. Let's take, for instance, say I'm on duty, I break my leg during the course of my workday. I'm paid, all my medical expenses are paid, and everything's taken care of. But for those officers that were involved in traumatic situations like that, that's not always the case. But the legislation that she introduced will enable that and make it so that officers that are into that type of situation receive the same type of care as if they were on duty and had broken a leg.
I like that. And also, folks, what we're trying to do and what we're trying to educate, PTSD could happen to a mother that's been abused or a mother that has lost a child. It's not just emergency workers. So everybody out there, listen to this. What Bruce just said is really important. I believe PTSD is a label, but it's a needed label. But I also want to believe, I don't want people to think that PTSD is going to be solved with one drug, one antidepressant. That isn't how the body works. We know that the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis is suppressed when you're in a stressful situation. There's something called a flashbulb image. If you want to remember a phone number, you got to say it a few times. It goes to your hippocampus, and then you lock it in long-term storage. When you're on a traumatic situation and you see something, you actually lock this into your long-term storage forever, and that's very, very hard for people to get their head around. So physiologically, when you're producing excess cortisol, when you're like Bruce or myself, we were on a traumatic scene, and at night I'm running all the scenarios in my head, I can't shut my head off at night. This is where the multifactorial approach, you have to look at the physiology. The intestinal tract is the second brain. We need to look at the intestinal tract. We need to look at the adrenal glands. We need to look at testosterone levels. When I talk about testosterone levels, I'm not talking about libido here or muscle. I'm talking about testosterone is a natural antidepressant that's suppressed by the stress hormone cortisol. You don't have to read the book by Dr. Sapolsky called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers to understand that psychoneuroimmunology means that cortisol suppresses every hormone in your body. Now, these police officers and firefighters and emergency workers may go to a doctor and they may get put on a statin drug. Well, they don't need a statin drug because that one drug that lowers cholesterol, you need cholesterol to make every beneficial hormone in your body. So by Bruce and I having this dialogue here, hopefully it'll paint a picture. When you have a family member or a friend that's going through PTSD, a traumatic situation, you'll understand that, maybe that Prozac, Paxil, or Zoloft, they could be on that for a little time, but we need to look at other parts of the body. Folks, I realized when I was a paramedic dealing with PTSD symptoms, they didn't even call it that at the time. I knew I had two options. I could go to a talk therapist, or then I could move forward and get my hormonal system checked. And because I knew about the physiology, and I've always been fascinated with the physiology, I knew that my thyroid, my adrenal glands, my growth hormone was all suppressed. So part of my rehab process was finding a doctor that would correct my testosterone, thyroid, cortisol, and growth hormone deficiencies. All those things impacted the feel-good chemicals in my brain, serotonin and dopamine. And I'm not saying talk therapy is bad, it's needed. But the talk therapy, along with the combination of hormonal and nutritional replacement therapy, that's going to be the future of treatment protocols, folks. You agree with that, Bruce?
Yeah, it needs to be. I remember being involved in a traumatic incident right after I got on the force. a small child had been run over. I'd never seen anything like that before.
Yeah, right.
And so there are a lot of people involved in it, from officers on scene to first responders, medical personnel, dispatchers. So the response to that was talk therapy. And I wish it had been one-on-one, but it really wasn't. It was a group session involving some victims advocates, and we talked about it, and it was made available to us, but that was it. There was nothing else. There was nothing one-on-one, and if you wanted any additional help, you were on your own.
How about that? Suck it up, homie.
Well, yeah.
This is what you signed up for.
Yeah, and that was the philosophy and a lot of the thought process for especially police officers. You know, like I said before, those big tough guys that can handle just about anything, but like I said, you can't do that consistently. And I wish something else had been made available. It's not something that impacted me negatively in the long run, but it's something I always remember.
Yeah, and that's that flashbulb image I was telling you about. When you're on a traumatic scene, and neurologically I could explain this, folks, but I will put you to sleep, and I want to do that. But all I'm saying is when you're involved in a traumatic situation, your adrenaline levels goes up. It imprints that scene into your head. And then, like Bruce and I've done this, I've run scenarios in my head. I can't sleep at night. So how am I going to tell a girlfriend, my wife, my friends that you end up being isolated, or you start hanging out with the police officers? You just hang out with people that get you, and that isn't healthy either. But how do you explain to people, you know, what you're going through? And then at the same time, you're in a job where you can't show any weakness. Like when I was on the scene and I started to break up on the scene, I'm getting emotional. I'm hearing this girl cry. I'm in charge of everybody, and I'm like, Jesus. And that field are like wolves. You see any weakness, you're done. You know, Bruce did something really, really unique. He started looking at intermittent fasting, which is going to be a hot topic, and also, you know, the ketogenic diet. And he's going to tell you about what he experienced. I think that's fascinating that you started that.
Yeah, it was something new for me. It's something one of the few diets that I hadn't tried, because trust me, I've tried just about all of them. The one that had worked best for me up until that point was the Atkins diet. But everything was so high protein and very little carb, but I still found myself hungry all the time. And then I switched to the 3 square meals a day, which did absolutely nothing for me. And then I tried the 6 meals a day, which was okay, but I found myself always looking towards that next meal, and it was distracting in kind of a way. But after speaking with you, I tried a ketogenic diet, you know, a little bit higher fat level, a little less protein, and a little lower carbs. And you explained to me the difference in how your body, the metabolism kicks in after a certain point, certain number of hours of fasting.
Yeah, and I wanted to be careful with you because
Uh-oh.
no, I'm saying I didn't want you to. Can you imagine? You're used to having your blood sugar elevated, and then now I'm saying, hey Bruce, go on the ketogenic diet, drop your blood sugar. Now you got to grab your weapon, and I'm like, I'm going to get the guy in trouble. So I wanted to go slow with you because here's the deal: shifting your brain from burning glucose to burning fat, you know, people need to. It's going to take time.
Yeah.
And then you could have mood swings. You could have feelings of being lethargic, and I didn't want that to happen to you while you were working, you know?
No, and it didn't. And I think the first time I felt my body switching over to burning fat instead of burning sugar was when I initially went on the Atkins diet.
Right, cool.
So when I switched to the ketogenic diet, I was accustomed, and
so you knew, okay.
I knew what was going to happen. And so I tried it for the first couple weeks. In the first couple days, I did fine. I would eat at 11 o'clock in the morning, between 11 and 12, and then I wouldn't eat again until between 5 and 6 p.m.
Wow.
And that's what I did, and I'm still doing that today. Now, the first week, I probably had 1 or 2 days where my body says, hey, you might need to eat a little bit more. So rather than adding an extra meal, I added a little bit more food to the beginning portion of my first meal of the day, and that kind of sustained me till the second meal of the day, and then I was fine.
Right.
I'm usually early to bed anyway, so by the time the hunger pangs kicked in, it wasn't until the next morning, and I just sustained myself until it was time to eat, which was not, it actually became very easy, and it was something that I got accustomed to, and my body adapted to very quickly, and I'm still doing that today.
And that's what's really interesting, because one of the things I learned from immersing myself, you know, living with triathletes and then living with emergency workers, that when you're under stress, it could be physical stress from doing a 100-mile bike ride or a triathlon, or emergency stress from working a 48-hour shift. As soon as you get off work, you want that poor man's Prozac, bagel, white rice, pasta, or alcohol. Alcohol is looked at like a simple carbohydrate in the body. So these two groups of people, I immersed myself in, and I was doing it myself. I was loading up and trying to medicate myself. But once I made the shift, and I got we shifted we were triathletes and we were called crazy. We went on the ketogenic diet in 1996, way before everybody else did, and we made a lot of mistakes. But when your brain starts burning fat, or the ketone called beta-hydroxybutyrate, it actually elevates feel-good chemicals in your brain. And I think, God, what an amazing tool. But like you and I talked about, a lot of people are addicted to the carbs, bud.
Yeah.
And it's hard. I've got to hire coaches right now to help people with that transition, because it's got to be done. It's like turning the dials on a stereo. Everybody's a little different. You're dropped into the second act of a third act play. But the dialogue we had, I knew you would pull it off. I knew you could focus. I knew you were an athlete and you were training. But like I said, I was worried about you having that dip off, but you never had it. So that's
No.
Okay, folks. The future of taking care of our emergency personnel and our troops, I believe that the brain chemistry is going to be looked at in a nutritional way, and it's going to be looked at in a hormonal way. Recovery from post-traumatic stress has to be multifactorial. Guys that have been in the street for 25 years, like Bruce and myself, we know that these options that we're talking about are not being delivered through traditional medicine yet. So we want to get the word out there, and the only way we can do that, folks, is if we educate you and you get people to talk about this, because nutrition has a lot to do with your brain chemistry and feeling good. Doctors have 4,000 hours of training, but none in nutrition. We know the psychiatrists and the psychologists give you labels like PTSD and bipolar, and they follow it up with a drug. We know that's going to be just a bridge. Everybody's biochemically unique. Every soldier, every police officer, every paramedic is biochemically unique. The sweeping generalization that Bruce and I talk about is, if you look at the intestinal tract, which is considered the second brain, you get it balanced out, you correct all the nutritional deficiencies with the advanced testing that we do, you correct the testosterone and thyroid levels, those things will impact the brain a lot faster and a lot better than Prozac. Just what Bruce talked about, the ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting impact more metabolic pathways in the brain than any drug on the market. And this is exciting information, and this is where I think we're going to be able to take this, brother. Folks, in my 20s, obviously, I thought I was bulletproof. I was one of the first paramedics to hit the street, so I was working 96-hour shifts because I wanted that money. And then I joined, a couple of years later, I joined, they asked me to be on the SWAT team, and I went through the police academy. Doing all this, I didn't understand what it was doing to my physiology. A few years after that, I got promoted to lieutenant. At the fire department, I was in charge of a shift. Well, while I'm in charge of a shift and I'm dealing with PTSD, I'm responding to emergency calls. I was still lieutenant paramedic then, and I'm giving people medication. And now the people that are screaming and yelling, I'm starting to hear it, and I'm starting to tear up on the scene. So now I'm getting emotional on the scene. I'm supposed to be in charge of 15 people, millions of dollars of equipment, and I'm starting to lose it, right? So where do I go? I go to the local bar the next shift and try to deal with this in my head. But I did go to counseling, and this is where I knew that we needed to do it better, especially today in 2017. Back then I would go to a counselor, and the counselor really couldn't relate with what I was going through. So with the suicides of my two friends, they started a critical incident stress debriefing team. They had more people that understood our jobs and what we did. So I'm going through the counselor, I'm looking at this guy going, this is worthless. And at that time, I needed other parts of my body to be taken care of. So here's what saved my life, believe it or not. I moved away from my emergency service community, and I started hanging out with a bunch of triathletes. Now think about physiologically what happened. By me wanting to do triathlons and I started running, I elevated my endorphins. I was out in the sun, elevating my melatonin levels. I wanted to train with these guys in the morning, so I had to get to bed. I had to limit the sugar. I changed my diet. So physiologically, by me moving away from that emergency service community and doing all the drinking, I moved out to the triathlon community, which was really, that's lonely. Anytime you make a change away from your peer group, it's lonely, let me tell you. So I moved and I started hanging out with the triathletes, thank God, because it was my saving grace. And I'm not telling people you need to do triathlons, but you always need to consider the community that you surround yourself with. Because I always tell people, Bruce, show me your 3 friends, I'll show you your health, right?
Yeah.
You also did a 5K in like a fasting state, right?
Yeah, I did. I had done previous 5Ks, and that's my preferred race of choice of race, but I don't do them as often as I used to. But after being on a ketogenic diet, if you remember one morning I sent you a text and I said, hey Russ, when's the best time to exercise during this intermittent fasting? Do I do it during the intermittent fasting, after my first meal, at night before I go to bed? What do you think is best? And you said during the state of fasting. So I hadn't run in a 5K in probably 6 or 8 months, and I hadn't really trained that hard for it either. And for the month prior to starting the ketogenic diet, I had absolutely no training whatsoever. I was so busy and wrapped up in other things I didn't train. But for my daughter, I went out and I ran a 5K one morning, and I decided to do it during intermittent fasting portion of my diet, which was an early morning. It was cold, it was about 40 degrees that morning, but I went out and I was interested in seeing if I had the energy to actually, one, finish, and two, how it compared to my previous times in 5Ks. And one of the things that surprised me was there was very little drop off, if any at all.
Wow.
My time was almost identical to what a normal 5K would be for me. I did have to change my intervals a little bit. I just don't go and I run steady and I maintain a single pace. I would go and I'd keep a high pace. It was more of an interval run for me. But my time was identical and there seemed to be absolutely no fall off. I got home, I was fine. I waited another hour. I had my first meal of the day, which was on schedule, and there were no ill effects from it whatsoever.
That's amazing, because I've got triathlete coaches in town here that are still preaching the high carbohydrate diet. I used to train with these guys, and they will not listen. But it's really interesting, folks. On a cellular level, this is really cool. You got mitochondria in every cell of your body, and your mitochondria creates energy, or ATP. So when Brewster's running in a fasted state on the ketogenic diet, his mitochondria on a cellular level, instead of burning carbohydrates, switched over and started burning fat. Well, now all the new research from all the Dalai Lamas in the endurance community is more and more endurance athletes are switching to the high-fat diet. Even the guy that won the Western States 100-mile run did it on a high-fat diet. So hearing you say that, and not wanting you to put to sleep with all the science, but no, it's good feedback for me, because when I get somebody on this, and now that you ran that race in a fasted state, I remember slamming down the gels and eating power bars and trying to get through a 10-mile run, and we don't need that. Isn't that odd? That's amazing.
There's examples of people that get involved in some sort of high intensity activity, and they've loaded up on carbs. But the one things they don't take into consideration is the amount of adrenaline they're building up and they're dumping after they start these activities.
Right.
And next thing you know, you haven't completed the activity and you're toast. You're done. You've got nothing left in the tank. But the thing I noticed with being on a ketogenic diet is that state of energy, the amount of energy I need to complete the task, is there consistently. At least during the 5K, it never dropped off. So.
Yeah, and if you go back to history, in the beginning of time, Tret and I did some research on this. Like Hannibal, when he was crossing the Alps, what Hannibal did was took animal fat and he shoved coffee beans in it and made them about the size of a golf ball. And this is what they ate when they would go to battle, and it said it would sustain them for 2 days. So you know what I mean? It's like when you study the history of performance, you see that they kind of knew back in the day that that fat was a great fuel, and we didn't need 3 meals a day. We didn't need all this grain. So anyway.
And I think one of the things that helps sustain me throughout the day is my higher intake of fat now than before,
Right.
even when compared versus the high protein that I did before. The higher fat intake is sustaining me longer. I don't feel hungry, and at some point in time, if it gets to be 5 or 6 or 6:30 at night, I have to force myself to eat because I know eventually I'll need those nutrients. But I'm able to do that and sustain that long period of time because of the higher fat intake.
The fat secretes something called CCK, cholecystokinin, which shuts off a satisfaction signal. Back when you were eating 6 meals a day, you were fluctuating insulin levels and you were constantly hungry. Folks, listen, emergency workers and the war veterans, police, fire, paramedic personnel, they have a special place in my heart. And if I didn't do those jobs, I would never be able to do what I'm doing today. And I want you to understand that if you have a loved one that's a war veteran or works for emergency services, they run into a jam, we could help them. Folks, you can see what we're doing on the Russ Scala YouTube channel, and also check out Scala Precision Health. And I want to thank my buddy Bruce. Thanks so much, man, for sharing.
It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it, brother.
You betcha.